This is Talking Netflix, the FCC podcast about Netflix. I'm Rascal F. Kennedy, your host, and these are my compadres.
Hi, I'm James Preston Poole, the one with the hottest takes in the room.
Hi, I'm Mark Tan, the managing critic of the site, and the one who tries to have some hot takes, but often has cold takes.
And I'm the newbie, Katie. I'm a reviewer and critic, and I think I've got hotter takes than both of you.
Ooh, this is exciting.
She definitely does have hotter takes. I'm kind of nervous to hear how she feels about Outer Banks.
Well, why don't you take us through what Outer Banks is, Rascal, since you're the one that got us all on this boat?
I stumbled upon this show, Outer Banks, and I've been kind of starved lately because I'm waiting on season 2 of The Society. So I figured that Outer Banks could be something that tides me over until I get a season 2. And I ended up binge watching it in one day, all 10 episodes. I thought it was pretty interesting. It's a teenage treasure hunt. And I mean, honestly, it's a recycled story, but for the most part, they took a lot of twists and turns. Something that I'm definitely interested in rewatching before we get a season 2. But honestly, I want to hear what Katie has to say.
So I found the last 3-ish episodes, maybe I'll give it 3.5. 3.5 episodes really interesting. The first couple episodes, it really took a lot for me to just not pick up my phone and play on Twitter or play a game because I was incredibly bored. I had a really hard time following all of the twists and turns. I'm like, okay, if this is a teenage treasure hunt, I'm like, I wasn't exactly prepared for all of them. Typically I like a mystery and new turns and everything, but this one was really hard to follow. And there were points where, and I told you guys in our chat, do I need to restart because I have absolutely no idea what's going on. But it turns out you really didn't need anything before episode 3. After that, as long as you were kind of paying attention, you were good.
I guess I'll bounce off of that. Surprisingly, I kind of loved this show from the beginning. To be thrown into this crazy treasure hunt that reminded me of something like the OC meets Riverdale, but just a lot more earnest and unironic. I just enjoyed the hell out of the whole thing. I thought it had a great cast of characters. Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. But point is, I really found myself feeling like I had discovered, or rather Rascal had discovered, something great that was going to be the next big Netflix hit.
So, it turns out that I fall somewhere in between you, Katie, and you, James, because as some of you guys have said already, this show's kind of a roller coaster in terms of genres. It starts out as this fairly simple teenager show with the typical social divide and the outcasts that starts out for me, I thought was very dull. But as soon as the treasure hunt came in around episode 2, it started to ramp up a little bit. And then something miraculous about halfway through, it went to even more genres than just treasure hunt. There's an episode even about halfway through that even involves horror, and by the time it gets to the end, it's almost like a thriller. So it's weird because this show is built off a lot of very generic archetypes and storylines. And yet, when you combine all that together, it's actually, at least for me, it was very compelling. I'm not going to go so far as to say this was an amazing show or a show that I would say, oh, if you don't have a Netflix account at all, you should subscribe to Netflix just for the show. But it's a show that kept surprising me almost every step of the way through.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Despite the fact that we all have different reactions, either slightly or completely different, I think we can all agree that those last few episodes were really fantastic.
I thought it got better once it stuck to a genre. Mark, I think you touched on a great point where it kind of keeps jumping. And it can't really decide what it wants early on, but once it decided on that thriller course at the very end, it's kind of where it got my attention more, and it was like, what the heck is going on? And so that's what made me really interested.
For me personally, each episode, it kind of grabbed your attention a little bit more because there were more questions that needed answers. So you were just waiting for each question that arose to be answered. So it's like every single time something happens or every time you question something, the further you go into the series, the more those questions continue to get answered. And I think that's really what grabbed my attention, was that I just kept wondering, who's this? What's that? Why are they going over here? And that's what grabbed my attention, was the mystery of each little thing that occurs during season 1.
I would add on to that is I think this show figured out very quickly how to write solid leading characters. Even though they might seem generic on the surface of it, once you put them in situations that force them to stretch their muscles a little bit, sometimes figuratively, sometimes literally, you realize that these really do feel like humans, like they feel like actual people, even if there's definitely parts of it that are a bit heightened, such as the whole relationship between the two main factions of this show, the Pogues and the Kooks, which in itself sounds silly, and yet somehow it still feels a bit nuanced.
I mean, really and truly, the whole Pogues and Kooks thing, you're right, it's hilarious, and it sounds like something that we would watch whenever we were teenagers. It's corny, but it also brings something to the TV show that helps you just kind of carry on because you have to choose sides.
I don't know if I ever really developed a bond with the two interloping gangs. I was just like, yeah, that wasn't really something that caught my attention.
I mean, here's the thing about, like, this is how I feel about that whole Kooks and Pokes thing. Not once did I feel like that whole section was interesting. It was always the things surrounding it that were kind of interesting. Particularly the quote-unquote bullies of the show, particularly Topper. It's one of those things where at first it seems like, there's just nothing else to him. And yet somehow just the commitment that character has to being as goofy as possible, it's just like, it's still interesting.
I would have to agree with Mark that these characters felt very well developed and like real human beings. And where the show goes beyond a show like The OC or Riverdale, which I both brought up earlier, is that everyone's fairly three-dimensional and likable in the Pogues. I'll touch on the villains in a bit. I love John B, love Key, I love JJ, I love Pope, and I even had a soft spot for Sarah Cameron the more we went on. And I think that Topper was such a deliciously evil and over-the-top villain that I couldn't get enough. Every element needed for a successful binge was there, character-wise. It made me kind of want to go on this journey with them, and I felt like while things were a bit confusing and exposition-heavy in the beginning, the more the show went on, the more they let the characters set the pace and dictate the action.
I think the exposition that kind of goes on in the beginning is something Netflix has always struggled with, especially being that they only typically carry an 8 to 12 episodes per a season of television for them. That's something Netflix has struggled with. So I can kind of cut the show some slack at that point because it's not a first for me in that genre where it feels a little too disjoint at the beginning. Sarah Cameron and John B were definitely two of my favorite characters, especially as the show got better footing in the end. The others, I would have liked to see more development, honestly, for them, because I feel like at the beginning, the show felt like it was supposed to be a team-up movie, but then in the end, when it picked up the thriller aspect, which when it caught my attention, it kind of lost everyone else in the background.
I agree. The characters felt very three-dimensional, but you can also kind of boil them all down to having their thing. Like Pope's thing is he wants to get into school. JJ's thing is that he has a rough home life. Key's thing is that she's kind of halfway between a Pogue and a Kook. It's really, John B on paper is the only one that has that full development, but I feel like the actors make it so that I didn't necessarily notice.
Yeah, I can definitely understand that, because personally my favorite character was Pope, and I guess we'll talk more about that in the spoiler corner. Each of them did have their own, characteristic that made them one-dimensional, but that one characteristic they stretched out very far and they made it very fluid. But I do agree with Katie that the characters get lost in the background once you get towards the end because of what's going on. They still get their climaxes, they still get their endings, to their stories for this season. But if you're not really paying attention, then it gets lost in the process.
And another thing that I noticed with this show, particularly with the four main characters, John B, Key, Pope, and JJ, is that every single one of them has to deal with daddy issues, which is certainly interesting in the case of Pope because it's always about the father who's always like, oh, you need to follow this thing, like you need to follow this path. And it's just, the problem is that it's kind of repeated for both Key and JJ. Katie, I'm also with you. The final few episodes just jettison their subplots because they're basically over with. By the time it gets to those last couple episodes, it really is just the John B and Sarah Cameron power hour. At that point, anytime it does cut to Key, Pope, or JJ, it's just like, oh, they're in this. Oh yeah, I almost forgot. Even though it really should involve the friendship between all four of them. It really isn't that by the time it gets to the end.
And really, were any of these kids' parents okay with them hanging out with each other? I feel like there were at least 20 little bits of scenes of parents being like, I don't like you hanging around those friends.
Honestly, I'll give you an exception to that. John B's dad, because he's dead.
Okay, yeah, well. And I guess now is the time to transition to the spoiler corner.
So if you don't want the show spoiled for you, then I suggest you take a quick hiatus until we bring up Extraction, because, yeah, we're probably about to get to a lot of spoilers. Very fast.
Right, okay, I gotta kick this off by saying, once we find out our main villain of the series, Ward, the entire thing changed for me. I feel like we had this great campy character who was just so over-the-top evil in a way even Topper couldn't touch that I was like, hell yes, here we go, this is the show.
Yeah, Ward being the villain was predictable, but it was still something that kind of caught you by surprise almost, because there's so many other people that could have played off as the main character, because they play certain characters like the police officers throughout the show, that they're the villain, that once it's finally revealed that it's Ward, you're just kind of like, man, that sucks because of Sarah and JB's relationship.
These kids just can't have anything, guys. Like, the show throws whatever BS obstacle it can in front of them.
Yeah, and the great thing about Ward is that he's not just, he's a fun villain. He's also a manipulative one. In fact, I'll even just jump to the final few episodes when he basically begs John B to just come back because John B already knows that, Ward Cameron's evil, he's gonna kill me. At that point, Ward's like, no, I'm not evil, I'm just good, like, this is just a big misunderstanding, but that performance and from that actor, Charles Eston, he just knows how to sell that he's manipulating this guy just to do whatever he wants.
Yeah, that's the crazy thing is the actors that they picked for this show were so spot on for their characters that it's weird. Chase Stokes matches John B perfectly, and Jonathan Davis for Pope.
Okay, let's get into it. What made him your favorite character?
I guess as someone who grew up with a dad who always wanted you to do better than you were because he knew you could do better, I could relate to Pope. My dad wasn't as pushy as Pope's father, but he definitely hit that every now and then. So I kind of understood where Pope was coming from whenever he had certain actions. But then sometimes I was just kind of like, Pope, man, you got to listen to your dad on this one. And lo and behold, he didn't. And things just continued to happen. Like whenever he gets jumped on the beach, or even whenever they sunk the boat. Some things you just got to let go. I could relate to Pope in certain ways. So that's probably why I carried him throughout the film like that.
Wow, that kind of makes me like his character a little bit more.
I don't know, man. It was just him and JJ. And JJ, because JJ was a hard ass. He always wanted to be the badass in the group.
About Pope, I completely agree. Of the four, Pope was the most fascinating character to watch, and a lot because it is stuff that I really do. Not so much the stuff with the father, because I wouldn't say that my dad is quite as hard as he is, but the scene where Pope tries to get a job, but sometimes he'll just freeze up, and of course, he has to leave because he found something important about the big treasure hunt. It's like sometimes I'll also do things on a whim, and I feel like this character just captures that so well.
Katie, who was your favorite character?
I said John B and Sarah, but I don't know, none of them I didn't really relate to any of the main characters at all, and maybe that's why I didn't really like the show. Yeah, I just didn't really relate to any of them, so I can't really say that I have a favorite.
So I guess since we are in the spoiler corner, Katie, I kind of want to hear what made you interested in the last couple episodes compared to everything beforehand.
Kind of when it got to where they're in the well and they're finding the gold and everything, I'm like, ooh, this just got interesting. Like, okay, now what are they going to do with the gold? And then one of the guys ends up buying a hot tub and everything. I'm like, dude, really? But it was mainly the thriller part, the hunt of John B. after Reef. Sarah's brother shot the sheriff. Kind of once that started, I was like, okay, now how is he going to get out of this? Is Sarah going to admit that her brother did it? Is the dad going to throw him under the bus and try and get out of the whole he killed John B.'s dad? That's kind of where I was like, it kept throwing questions at you and it made you want to look at things that were like, okay, what's going to happen next? Like, what's the answer to this?
For sure. It was almost like this crazy set of dominoes that kept falling over until we got to our conclusion. And what did we all think of the ending of the season?
I've been thinking about this question for a while. In terms of the things that happen, I guess on a more poetic level, is I definitely like that aspect of it, because the whole thing about the treasure hunt is that John B, Key, Pope, and JJ, they do get the gold. Although, let's just say things sort of fall in the wrong hands with Ward, and now with Ward having the money, he basically has that money shipped to his other house in the Bahamas. And with the ending, where is John B and Sarah going? To the Bahamas. So that basically gives you the idea, oh, they can get the money. They can get the gold. As far as the other characters go, I really don't... I said this earlier, they just basically evaporate, which I felt like that was the real disappointing thing. Like, I never got a satisfying conclusion from any of the other characters other than Sarah and John B. There's just, I guess, a level of poetry to it that even with the issues at hand, I still found it a solid ending.
Yeah, I enjoyed the ending. I thought it was safe enough ending for this season if a season 2 doesn't come, but also intriguing enough for a season 2 where you wonder, okay, now is season 2 going to be them trying to figure out how to manage this money? Who else is going to come after this money? But it didn't have that big stinger where I was like, oh, I gotta have more.
For me personally, I understand why they kind of lost the other characters, because the story was mainly about John B trying to get the gold for his dad, because that's what his dad was searching for. So he was trying to finish the mission that his father started. Of course, it would have been cooler to see the rest of the characters go with them, to see Pope and Key and JJ go with them on a boat through a storm, get on this other ship, and then I guess they're heading to the Bahamas. That would have been nice. That would have been real neat. But to make season 2, now you have JJ, Pope, and Key left to clean up John B's mess while John B and Sarah go to the Bahamas and do we don't know what yet. Because like you said, we don't know who's after it. We don't know if they're going to have to launder the money. We don't know how this is going to happen or occur. For all we know, they're going to turn Outer Banks into Ozark. It would be odd, but wouldn't be anything out of the ordinary for Netflix.
To me, the ending, I can appreciate how they set it up for a potential season 2 and also how it ended to if there's not a season 2, like you said, James. However, I needed more wrap up with either the dad or the brother. Like, I get we saw the sheriff go to the dad, hey, we're gonna have to talk after this, but I needed the brother to get caught or the dad to figure it out. I needed some wrap up there because I'm just like, that's too many open threads to try to explain away in a season 2 premiere when you're trying to move forward to a new set of stories.
Part of me had wished they would have cut some of the exposition in those first 2 episodes and made room for those storylines to be tied up at the end of this season rather than saving them for season 2.
It feels like part of that issue stems from the fact that this is a 10-episode show. Maybe if they simplify it to maybe 7 or 8. It's an issue I have with a lot of Netflix shows, such as Stranger Things. It's just slightly too long, like 1 episode or 2 too long. And if you just trim parts of each episode, it would be a little more satisfying.
That's why James is going to drop that article about Netflix real soon.
It feels like Netflix is almost a little too scared in general of confusing their audience. So they make 3 episodes out of what should be the finale of the season, which I think is unnecessary because it's streaming. We have the ability to rewind. So if we miss something, we can go back. It's not like we're watching a movie in the theater. If too much information is thrown at us, we'll have to go see it again, you know?
I don't know. I feel like they could definitely cut the seasons down. Like Mark said, like some of the shows like Stranger Things, you don't need the episode where Eleven goes to find her sister. But the first 3 episodes, for whatever reason, of Outer Banks are spent giving you the characters and whatever background they can scrounge up about the characters before you get into what the story actually is. And while it's interesting, it is very, very, very drawn out.
It's a big reason why the one episode that made me realize, wow, I'm actually really into this, is the episode in which John B and Sarah Cameron are together doing their mission. At that point, it stopped feeling like bland teenagers just doing their thing. It actually felt like characters who felt active in what they want to do and also had a lot of fun doing it. Because the whole gimmick with that episode, I think it was episode 4, is that they basically try to play act.
Yeah, that's whenever they did the whole Russian spies thing.
Yeah, that was a really strong episode. Between that episode and the one where they break into the house and get the gold, they kind of highlight what Mark was saying about how when the series is very driven by plot and exposing the character through their actions, it can be really riveting stuff. And I look forward to seeing that expanded in a potential season 2.
But it's only potential. Let's get you guys ending thoughts on Outer Banks, and we'll jump over to Extraction. You can start with Mark.
Sure, I'll start. What the creators of the show nail, who are named, I believe, Shannon Burke, Jonas Pate, and Josh Pate, they know exactly how to progress each episode one from the other, because almost every single time an episode's almost finished, they stop at a really phenomenal point, whether it involves a character beat or a plot beat or something that's about to happen that's really intense. It's been a while since I've seen a show that kept doing that so consistently. And even with the things that I don't like about it, for example, the first couple episodes feeling very dry, and like a lot of teen soaps that kind of turned me off for how kind of bland they are, it gets better every single episode. And it's because of that that I'll give this a solid recommendation.
I think this series, it's not the master of anything that it does, but it has all the ingredients for just a really solid, time-consuming, in the best way possible binge. And I'm kind of jealous of Rascal, because I would have loved to just take this whole thing down in an afternoon.
You know, it's all in a day's work. I personally feel like this is something that can grow within Netflix. It's definitely not their best work, but it is interesting. Again, this was really just supposed to be a fix for the society, and it ended up being a show that I actually found very, very interesting. I would recommend it to anybody. I've been recommending it to people all over Twitter who are always asking, what is there to watch on Netflix? And I hope that it does gain more popularity and more traction. It's one of the better shows on Netflix from a lot of the other stuff that I've seen so far. And I hope that they gain from everything that they learn through this, and they just get better with the storytelling.
If it could have lost an episode and a half out of the beginning, I would give it a recommendation. This might be something good if you're really bored and you want to just put your phone down and not pick it up, and you know you're not going to pick it up because otherwise you're easily going to lose track of things, like I did. Other than that, I wouldn't say pick it up unless you're really willing to commit to don't look at anything else while you're watching this.
As you guys can see, we all have differing opinions, and we're definitely going to bring this back up as we continue this podcast. Now we're going to start talking about Extraction.
I've been waiting for this moment.
Oh man, I feel like this is going to be something where I side with Katie and James kind of rips into this movie.
Well,
I'm interested.
I'll let y'all talk about it first. I'll hang back.
Katie, I want to hear from you first.
Before I say anything, if you want to hear my written thoughts, you can go check out my review on Full Circle Cinema. Just throwing that out there. Shameless plug.
Excellent.
To kind of go into it, I found a lot of the camera work in the first 45 minutes really hanky-janky. I got a little bit of nosh from some of it. It felt a lot like Hunger Games, where the camera just couldn't find a moment to stay still. And I get it was action sequences for a lot of it, but even some of the moments in the beginning where everyone's on solid ground, no one's really moving a whole lot, it felt like the camera just couldn't stop shaking. So that was a big pet peeve of mine. For the first 75% of it, it's a pretty good action movie, and then the ending just destroys me. It absolutely destroys me.
I will piggyback off of that and say that the ending, man, we're definitely going to drill this ending in the spoiler corner if you guys want to wait around, because wow. But what I will say is I personally enjoyed the camera work. It was almost like a first-person shooter video game. I felt like I was running a game of Call of Duty. It was very intense. And me and my girlfriend were sitting here. We were in a trance because of the camera work. And I actually watched how they shot this film. And I just want to say kudos to the cinematographer, man, because, wow, that seemed like it was a lot of fun.
So it looks like I'm more positive on this than either of you, Rascal and Katie, because I came into this movie just wanting some nice, solid action and a good leading man guiding me through the movie. And I gotta be honest, that it does exactly what it promised. It's certainly not a great film, and in terms of a piece of writing, it's very, very primitive, up to and including how it treats certain minorities. But when you really break it down, Like Katie said, it's mostly just all action all the time, and this director, Sam Hargrave, this is his first film. I was pretty impressed by a lot of the stunt work, so the choreography, it just impressed me every step of the way through. And while I do recognize that it also has a lot of handheld camera work that makes things hard to see, I still was able to see enough of it that it never made me confused, it never made me angry that I couldn't see anything. Really, the biggest problem with this movie is just the screenplay by Joe Russo, because it commits a couple of sins that just drive me up the wall. The first scene is basically almost the end of the movie, and I hate it when a movie starts with one of its last scenes and it doesn't really tell us much other than, oh, here's this thing that's going to happen maybe an hour or 40 minutes later. And also the ending, which we'll get into. Just as a pure action movie, I enjoyed it. I would never say that the writing's remarkable. I don't think that much of the cast really does anything outside of Chris Hemsworth. There's a brief bit with David Harbour that just went by, didn't really make much impression, but as far as that action goes, it's got the goods.
I'm probably going to be the most negative of all of us. First, let me get to the positive. I thought the action was phenomenal. I didn't particularly have an issue with the camera work, and I thought the choreography was really great. There's a one-take shot, or made up to look like a one-take shot in there that was really just outstanding stuff. But my praise kind of ends there. When we were talking about Outer Banks, Katie brought up that that's a show that you really can't look at your phone while you're watching because the temptation will be too much. You just keep on looking at your phone. It took me 3 minutes into this movie before I pulled out my phone and started scrolling while I was watching it. And I know that's a bad thing to admit on a critical podcast, but I just have to give what my experience with this movie was. I wasn't able to latch on to any of the characters. I found the story dull and predictable and quite problematic in how it dealt with its people of color characters, seeing as how the director, as well as Joe Russo, don't really seem to have any experience with the subject matter. In between the fireworks, I was just watching a movie and nothing more.
And sometimes those action movies that are just pure action are just sometimes what you need in a case. Like you say, okay, cool, fight scenes. I know there's a couple that have been that for me. Taken, for one, I really enjoyed that one, and there's not really a whole lot to it. It follows kind of the same plot lines as Extraction does. But in this case, I was just like, really? And probably the biggest thing that got me about the regular action, like, story, forget about it, but you can't even have Chris Hemsworth make a quip. He can't even make a sarcastic comment. That's kind of something that I've kind of known Chris Hemsworth characters to have. Thor, Men in Black, he's typically pretty good at a snarky comeback, and there was none of that here. And I'm like, okay, I need something to keep me interested and say, okay, if there's a little bit of lightheartedness here, something to make me laugh at all the blood flying around, something. And no, it was just pure action, and there was nothing to distract from that until the ending.
Here's the thing. I understand that you're basically craving for Chris Hemsworth's quips because the character's written very flat. But I have to say, in context, I felt like if he were to make those quips, I felt like it would have been a tonal disaster. You can almost sort of feel that come on from David Harbour's character, even though he doesn't actually make quips, but just the vibe that his presence feels like he would say something lines like that. But I don't know. I guess with Chris Hemsworth's character, Tyler Rake, who, need I remind you, he's a guy who kills the guy with the rake. That's the punchline with him. It's not anything to do with dialogue. It really is just, it's such a pure action movie that the biggest joke involving him isn't through any dialogue. It's through something he does with violence.
That's the thing to me. Regarding the violence in this film, it almost feels very cartoony and over the top. And, for God's sakes, our main character's name is Tyler Rake. It feels so badly like Extraction is a B-class action movie that wants so badly to be a prestige thriller. So it kind of drowns out what this movie does well in this air of self-seriousness that just kind of a drag to me.
I get maybe you can't have him make lighthearted quips, but there wasn't enough sarcasm in there, and a lot of people can do serious sarcasm really well, and I think Chris Hemsworth is one of those people where you can keep an absolutely straight face, but say something sarcastic, and you can kind of feel, okay, there's something coming through, because I get Rake's character, he's depressed because of blank, because spoilers, but at some point it felt like he needed to fight back emotionally in certain cases to really give off what his character was trying to do, and yet the only fight back he would give would be physically. So I felt he needed an additional emotional attachment to fighting back and kind of say, okay, maybe I can be invested in this character.
There just really wasn't anything there for us to latch onto beyond him being Chris Hemsworth and Chris Hemsworth being fantastic.
It's a Russo brothers problem. They're literally latching onto their clout from the MCU. They're using actors from the MCU, and this is literally every film that they've done since the Avengers. 21 Bridges, Extraction, the movie they're doing with Tom Holland. It's their thing. It's what they're doing right now. They're literally riding the wave of the Avengers. And it's working. People are watching, but it's clearly starting to become a problem. And like Katie said, even in Cabin in the Woods, Chris Hemsworth is always quippy. He always has a response. There's always some smart, funny thing that he says that kind of makes you, no matter what the film is, it makes it a little bit lighthearted. And it takes away from the seriousness of the film and it calms you down a little bit. Cabin in the Woods, the more you get into that movie, the more horror it becomes. But up until Chris Hemsworth bites the dust in that movie, he kind of helps make it to where it's not all blood and guts. So I definitely understand where Katie's coming from.
I'm really interested in your analysis of these Russo brothers projects, just not giving these actors much to do. Do you think it's a problem with the fact that they had better writers on the Avengers films?
You're right, though, because they're trying to write these movies themselves and kind of do everything themselves. They can put a team together and stick to directing and producing. You don't have to write the script. You don't have to do every single thing and be a part of every little bit because you weren't doing that with the Avenger films. You didn't do that with The Winter Soldier. You didn't do that with Civil War. You didn't do that with Infinity War and Endgame. You had a team of people and it worked perfectly. And now you're kind of biting yourself in the foot with these post-Avenger movies.
What's funny about the Russos doing all these projects that aren't directing, like producing and writing, the last time the Russos have written something was for their first film, Welcome to Collinwood, which is like a comedy. You could understand them writing comedy because it's fairly small. You could probably figure out stuff like that. But with this movie, since you have to cover a lot of different ground, especially involving people of color, you gotta be really careful not to mess that up. And it's clear that Joe Russo, he just did not put much into it. I mean, I haven't seen 21 Bridges, so I can't really vouch for if any of those failings are pretty significant. But yeah, like I'm looking back at the career of the Russo brothers, and it's clear, like a lot of television people, they really need to depend on great writers. And they were given that on Captain America, Winter Soldier. They were given that on Civil War. They were given that on the two Avengers movies. But Extraction, that's just not the case at all.
And back to your people of color comment, there was a point in time where a film like Extraction, I want to say it was The Great Wall, and people lost their minds because what is a white guy doing at the Great Wall of China? Because I didn't watch that film because so many people hated it off the bat. And this kind of gave me the same vibe as The Great Wall. You have a white savior, and it just really gave me that vibe. I can understand why people are upset because there's actors in Bollywood that maybe could have killed that role. They stuck Chris Hemsworth in there as the face of the project, and to me, that's a failing.
I think it's even more of a failing because not only is he a white savior, but they make him the most perfect character with no issues or no failings or anything like that. He's not even interesting as a character, so you just kind of have this really awkward situation where this dude's just kind of inserted into a story where he's just taking roles from other people.
And Rascal, you mentioned The Great Wall. I have seen that movie. It was a couple years since I saw it, but I will say something that movie does better than Extraction is that despite Matt Damon being the face that you all see throughout the movie, that movie really is about working as a team with the other generals and the other warriors. So rarely did that movie feel like, oh, it's completely a white savior movie. I think that movie's still pretty weak because the action's terrible. But as far as that controversy about Matt Damon, that movie found a way to work around that. But Extraction does not do that at all. It feels like something from like an 80s movie where it always feels like, oh, it's the white guy and the other people. Whereas Great Wall, that actually doesn't have as much as you think.
Yeah, I was just trying to use that as an example because I know a lot of people were upset about that. And at first I didn't get it, but after I kind of read through a few of what people were saying, then it made more sense. I guess now would be a great time to go to our spoiler corner. So again, you can either skip over this or you can go ahead and turn us off. Choice is yours. But yeah, we're about to spoil the crap out of this movie, so you've been warned. Now, James, rip us apart.
Alright, where do we start with the ending?
The fact that the movie opens with almost the ending?
Yeah.
Pretty much. Oh my god. You know what's crazy? Whenever it opened with that, I was like, are they really giving us the end of the movie already?
Funny, because it's not even like the character changed that much from like the actual beginning of the movie to the end. So you could have been mistaken by just thinking it was just another part of the movie.
Starting with the ending of the movie doesn't really bother me, especially in movies like this. Where the ending got me is the main villain of the film, the drug dealer guy who kidnaps the other guy's son. He says there's always a bigger badass. And I changed this to the PG version of there's always a bigger fish in my review. But to have the bad guy of the film say that, and then you can't even have your main hero guy who is under threat trying to save this kid, you can't even have him go in and kill him. Like, I guess that was where the whole movie just like lost me. Whereas I was like, okay, you had me until this point. And then the kid is in the pool, he comes out of the pool, and then all of a sudden you see a hazy image of a white guy standing there. And I'm like, are you really trying to make me attached to this kid and make me want to see if there's something else? Like, you couldn't just end it. Just cut it off. You did a great job. And now you're telling me that someone else kills the drug dealer guy. And then you're trying to tell me, oh, hey, maybe he did survive this. Or maybe that's just some weird guy staring at the kid. Come on. Pick whether you want to be a pure action movie or whether you want me to be attached. If you want me to be attached, then I need better character development in the movie.
Right. It felt like an ending out of an entirely different movie, and probably a much better movie, but you can't throw that at us at the end. You can't act like you were something more meaningful than you were. All I wanted this movie to end with was a really great shootout or something ridiculous. That's the only thing it was really good at up to this point. But couldn't even do that.
It was like a mixture of action films. It was like John Wick meets The Equalizer. And like The Equalizer, you can like not relate, but you feel for Denzel Washington's character. And John Wick, you just want John Wick to kill all the bad guys the worst possible way. And it feels like that film tried to do that. Like it tried to give you a very John Wick type film. And then it tried to end like how The Equalizer ends, where Denzel Washington teaches the kid that lesson. And The Equalizer 2, tries to tell him that he doesn't always have to be tough and be a hard ass. And that's where it kind of collides. And you're looking for John Wick in this movie, but then you end up getting an Equalizer ending. And you just want it to be a John Wick movie full stop. And that's where the Russo brothers kind of lost their footing with this film.
About the ending, I think the whole idea of Chris Hemsworth almost dying at that shootout, like I like everything up to that point. As soon as it starts fading to black, that's when I'm like, no, movie, what are you doing? Why are you not cutting to the credits? This seems like a perfect ending and stop. You guys are ruffled up about that final shot, but I feel like that entire last few minutes felt so extraneous. I don't usually like epilogues for stuff because often they run too long, and that's exactly the case here. The white savior thing, that's definitely a problematic idea, but it's like, it would be one thing if you just committed to it, like, okay, he died to save the kid, right? That would be fine. And yet the ending, not just the ending, but also what the director and Joe Russo said about it, it's like, they really wanted it to be this ambiguous thing. And for a movie that tries so hard to be like, oh, these people of color, they're bad, like, this is how bad they get. For the movie to just immediately get ambiguous for the very last frame, I just found it completely dumb.
I couldn't agree more. Y'all are making excellent points. One thing that stuck out to me is that if it had ended where you, Mark, thought it should have ended, it would have just been, okay, it was just another Netflix action movie I watched, like big whoop, didn't ruin my day or anything, not gonna think too much about it. But giving us those wildly mishandled last few minutes gives you that extra time to sit and think about the problems of what you just watched. And Extraction is definitely not a movie that's meant to be thought on.
No, it's not. It's not a film that you're supposed to write 20 different think pieces about. It's a film that was supposed to be a straight action film that at the end tries to give you some complicated, nuanced, deeper meaning ending. And it just, I've never seen a movie fail at an ending worse than this. And it sucks because you get this great build up and then you just get this really, really, really bad ending.
I'm surprised that I haven't seen more pieces about how the ending is so mishandled, because immediately the first thing you hear when you talk to anyone is they're going to say, yeah, I watched Extraction. It was alright, but the ending sucked. It's almost just common knowledge at this point.
Yeah, and I've actually seen a lot of people who are like, oh my gosh, this is one of Netflix's best action movies. Like, I've seen better action movies from Netflix. Like, they're not great. But the fact that an ending tries, like y'all said, why should I have to think about the ending to an action movie? It's unpurposeful at all. And the fact that the only girl in the movie, other than, like, the wife, the one with the bazooka, the fact that she kills the bad guy at the end is, like you couldn't just leave her as a supporting character in this. No, you had to make her come back with revenge. Was she, like, the lost love from Rake's? Was she the mother of his son or something? Was she the wife that he kind of turned his back on when his son died of leukemia? Why was she so torn up over his death? Did anyone get that at all?
No, I agree with you. There wasn't really a
So, like, why did she need to be the one that killed the drug dealer at the end?
I don't know. I felt maybe they were just trying to say, well, I guess the mission gets done no matter what. But again, it wasn't that type of movie. So with that being said, I guess, do y'all want to go into final thoughts?
So, final thoughts. Again, you can read my review on Full Circle Cinema, but it's a very low-tier action movie. I gave it a 3 out of 10 on there. Spoiler alert. The ending completely tore me up. The camera stuff doesn't bug me that much because I get it. Certain things appeal to more people, and maybe I wasn't the intended audience for this movie, so the camera work doesn't bug me that much, but the ending's what drives me crazy. And so I would not recommend at all whatsoever. Like, there's better action movies to go see. There's bigger fish to go see in the action movie world.
It's really funny because over these past few minutes, the movie's just been getting lower and lower in my estimation. I'm still not at the point that I outright hate it, because it's a film that clearly wanted the action at the priority. But just because at the priority doesn't mean there aren't other things that are wrong about it. And it's clear that Joe Russo and Sam Hargrave, like, whatever they've done with the writing, it just isn't there. Chris Hemsworth, he tries, like, he has good presence, but there's just not much there. And it's one of those movies that it just gets worse and worse by the time it gets to the end. When you get an action movie in which the ending's the worst part, it just feels sour. Now that I've thought about it more, it just felt underwhelming. And while I'm not going to say this is the worst Netflix action movie, the big hit of Spencer Confidential, that takes the cake, but it just feels like a huge missed opportunity. It's a sign that Joe Russo should just stick to directing stuff as opposed to writing.
Going off of that, I just didn't feel anything while watching this movie. There was some nice action, but ultimately just everything was mishandled in some way or another. It's one of those movies where you see the logo for it on Netflix, see some prominent white action star like Chris Hemsworth dressed up in military garb, and you're like, okay, I can skip this. And I'm here to let all the listeners know, yes, you can skip this one too.
I guess my final thoughts are that Extraction in an action movie, it's a nice film, decent. What it tries to be, it fails epically. There's no conversation for people of color. There's no conversation about India and I guess you can say the laws and some of the things that happen out there. There's no deeper conversation, which I guess that's what this movie was trying to do in its underlining. And like we've repeated effortlessly throughout this podcast, it fails. I hope that, whenever we come back for our next episode, that we have something where we can give you guys happier thoughts. Because this film, unfortunately, for the Russos and for Mr. Sam, it fails. I'm sorry to say that.
Now I'm just sad. All right. I guess to end on a high note, what's everyone else been watching if they've been enjoying?
The Magicians. Oh my gosh, why didn't I watch this live?
Man, The Magicians is crazy. I have watched All American. It's really good. I wish I would have caught the first 2 seasons whenever they were airing on CW. I do look forward to season 3. And of course, Ozark. James, you need to watch Ozark. Looking at you,
I do. I saw There Will Be Blood for the first time. I haven't been watching many Netflix originals, but I watched There Will Be Blood for the first time. Loved it. And I've also been watching a lot of That 70s Show.
I'll just spotlight one movie right now. It's a movie that, funnily enough, I actually included in a stay-at-home article recently. This is David Lynch's The Straight Story. It's just a really calming movie with great characters and great atmosphere. And this being a David Lynch movie, even though it's clearly not as bonkers as some of the stuff he would do before and after this, there is still a level of eccentricity that made it very, very appealing.
Well, awesome. I guess that about wraps us up. So I'm James Preston Poole, lead critic for Full Circle Cinema.
I'm Mark Tan, managing critic of Full Circle Cinema.
I'm Katie, critic and feature writer for Full Circle Cinema.
And I am Rascal F. Kennedy, your host, and we will be back soon.